Here's everything you're going to need to change the brakes on your Ford Taurus or Mercury Sable. You're going to need obviously a brake disc, brake pads. That is the plate that goes inside the caliper that the springs for your brake pads ride on. A bungee cord or some kind of wire to tie up your caliper. A 12mm socket, 15mm socket, 19mm socket for the lug nuts, and then you might find a breaker bar helpful, and a vice grip, a C-clamp vice grip. Now, you can use the slip joint pliers, but the likelihood of getting your piston and your caliper in there crossways and jammed up is a lot higher. With this, you can push in the center and push it back straight, so I would suggest this over like water pump pliers. Jack up your car, take off the tire. Now that you have the tire off, what you want to do is use your 12mm socket to take this bolt and this bolt loose, and that will allow you to pull your caliper off, and then you're going to want to hang it by your bungee cord from your springs here. You'll notice there's a flat spot on these pins, and that flat spot has to be rotated so they fit in here, and that's so that pin doesn't rotate when you tighten these bolts down with your 12mm socket. After you have your caliper hanging, you can use your C-clamp vice grip to slowly push your piston back into your caliper. This is necessary because if you're putting new pads on, they're going to be bigger, and that piston needs to be back inside the caliper. This is also a good time to check to make sure that this dust seal, this boot here, is not damaged, and also make sure that your pins move freely. You should be able to hear grease inside it. And make sure that these bellows are not cracked or torn. And honestly, if they move freely and you can hear that grease and these bellows aren't torn, just leave them alone. Otherwise, you can peel them back and they pop off of there, and then you can re-grease these and clean them. But these are good. I'm not going to mess with them. Likely I'll just tear this or introduce bad material. So next up, pull your brake pads out. They just drop right out. Also, inside your caliper, see this piece of tin in here? There's that piece of tin. That's what those springs ride on. Those springs on top of your brake pad ride on that, so replace that. If your brake kit comes with more parts, don't put them in. Just put in what you take out. You can pop the old one out with a screwdriver or a pocket knife, and then it just slides right back in. You might notice with this piece of tin, you might need to bend it just a little bit to get it into your caliper. That's normal. They need to deform a little bit. So now, use your breaker bar and your 15mm socket to remove this bolt and this bolt, and that will allow this caliper bracket to come off, and then we can remove our brake disc. You may have noticed on my other brake disc, my new one, there are threaded holes in it. If your brake disc is stuck on your hub, you can run a screw into those holes. Again, this one doesn't have it, the other one does. You can run screws into those holes, and then it will help pull your brake disc out. Another thing you can do is use a propane torch and heat right around here, and that might help it expand enough to pop off of here. And this one has retainer clips, so you need to remove these retainer clips before you try and pull this off. You might be able to just work it back and pull these off. Otherwise, a side cutters or needle nose pliers can just cut these, grab them and turn them. They tear pretty easy. So we'll take those off. We'll take these two bolts out, take this caliper bracket off, and then pull the brake disc off. Before you resort to heat or extreme measures, you might just take a rubber or plastic hammer, pop it a few times around here. As you can see, a bunch of stuff fell out. That got mine loose. If you've got new ones you're putting on and you're not keeping these to have them turned and resurfaced, you could use a metal hammer, but I guarantee then they're garbage. With a plastic hammer, you could take these to a machine shop and have them turned, and you can reuse them. Now that you're down to the bare hub, you're going to want to make sure that this is more or less clean. You know, there's not a large amount of corrosion or rust buildup. Hit it with some brake cleaner product, and then go ahead and wipe it down with a rag. That way everything seats nice and flat, because if it doesn't, you're going to have everything out of alignment and everything's going to shake, and that's going to be bad. So go ahead and clean that off and then put the new brake disc on. And what I like to do is I just hold it down flat and run one lug nut up against it just finger tight to hold everything straight while I reassemble. At this point we can go ahead and reassemble the opposite way that we took it apart. So first I'll put the caliper bracket back on. Use the 15mm socket, put those bolts in, and then we'll put the brake pads into that caliper bracket, and then we'll put the caliper back on. Something you should know about brake discs is when they ship, they've usually got some sort of anti-corrosion coating on them, so you're going to want to use brake clean and a rag to wipe all that anti-corrosion coating off of here. Also, if you touch the brake surface, like I try and hold them by the outside or by the inner hub, if you touch the braking surface, the oils in your skin and the dirt and the grease that you're getting into could create hot spots on your brakes, and that could cause pulsing or uneven wear. So once you get them on, you're probably going to want to spray them down one more time with brake clean to make sure they're clean. You don't want any grease or skin oil or anything on that braking surface. Okay, now that we have the pads in, you can see that they fit really nicely in there with the rotor. We've got our metal plate in there that our anti-rattle springs ride on. We can go ahead and put that caliper back on here. And again, we made sure all our pins are free and greased and no tears in the bellows before. So we can bolt that right onto here. Now that we've got the caliper bolted in, everything is done. We can take this one lug nut off that I use to hold everything in place, and we can put the tire back on. When we put the tire back on, we'll torque the lug nuts to 85 to 95 foot-pounds as long as they're all the same. And when you torque them, go in a star pattern. So do this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. Go around and check them again, make sure they're all the same. And then there's one more super important step that you absolutely have to do before the car goes anywhere. Now that the vehicle's on the ground and everything's all tightened up and ready to go, before I start the car and drive anywhere, that brake pedal went to the floor. Went pretty far that time. Now it's starting to firm up. So you need to pump your brake pedal to get the fluid back down to the calipers, because if you don't, you're going to back your car up and that's going to go to the floor and you're not going to stop and you're going to run into something. So pump your brakes before you even start the car and go anywhere.